Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome to your sleep story. I am Theresa Noye, your radical self-love coach. I work with high-achieving women who typically put themselves last to love themselves enough to put themselves first. You deserve to love, cherish, and honor yourself without guilt because your well-being matters. It gives me great joy to be the voice that guides you into a restful sleep tonight. You are so deeply loved. Your existence is the proof. Before we begin tonight's sleep story, let's start with a relaxation session. I'm going to count down from 10 to 1, and as I do, allow yourself to let go more and more. 10. Feel the support beneath you, the support of your bed, the floor, and the earth beneath. Imagine the warm sand of a beautiful beach cradling you, holding you with the earth's gentle strength. Allow that certainty, that solidity to enable you to release a little more, to sink into this moment a bit more. 9. You are safe. All is well. Allow my voice to be a point of safety for you. Allow my voice to be an anchor that keeps you in a safe space. Know that my voice will only ever bring you into safe places. Feel into your body now. Notice where you might be holding tension. Maybe your feet, your hands, your face, or your belly. Just release it all. Your body has worked hard for you today. It's time for it to rest. It deserves rest. 8. Today is done. Whatever has been, has been. Whatever will be, will be. All you have is now. So thoughts about the day that just was, or days that are to come, don't serve you right now. Allow that realization to enable you to settle into this moment more. 7. This is your moment. You have nowhere to be, nowhere to go. The only place you need to be is here, enjoying this cozy sleep story and the sound of my voice. You deserve it. 6. You deserve it. You deserve rest. You deserve sleep. You deserve to be here. Allow that fact to help you let go a little more. 5. Perhaps allow yourself to feel a little gratitude now. Gratitude for this moment. Gratitude for the ability to rest. Gratitude for the simple things. Your breath, the shelter you have tonight, the opportunity to switch off in a place of safety. 4. Embrace the coziness of this moment, the coziness of lying down in a safe space, moving towards sleep in the beautiful act of storytelling. 3. Begin to engage with your imagine now. Engage with your imagination. Picture a beach in the Caribbean, a secluded spot on the beautiful island of Barbados, isolated from the rest of the world, or another favorite spot that you may have. Allow yourself to engage. Bring that picture to mind and check in with your body again. Make sure you're not holding tension anywhere. Release and allow yourself to sink a little deeper to completely let go now as I tell you tonight's sleep story. The Candlelit Artists Loft, Chapter 1, Arriving in the Glow. The evening had just begun to lean toward night when she stepped into the loft. It was the kind of space that didn't so much welcome you in as it breathed around you, exhaling the day's rush and inhaling something slower, softer. The city outside had its own hum, distant traffic, a faint siren somewhere. But in here, those sounds softened into a low backdrop, like a jazz musician's brush against the snare. Candles flickered from every corner, each one cupped in glass jars or brass holders that seemed to have a memory of another time. The light wasn't hurried. It pooled in golden shapes across the wooden floor, stretching up the walls where paintings leaned in quiet conversation with each other. They were all different, some bursting with bold color, others whispering in pale pastels, but they shared a kind of intimacy, as if each one had been painted in a moment that belonged to no one but the artist and the canvas. She set her bag down near an armchair, draped in a worn, soft blanket. Its fabric looked like it had absorbed years of laughter, whispered confidences, and long hours of stillness. She noticed the scent in the air, something warm and delicate, like vanilla brushed with cedar. Beneath it was the faintest trace of turpentine, the perfume of creation. Somewhere in the corner, a small record player spun a vinyl, releasing the slow curl of a saxophone's notes into the air. The music didn't fill the room so much as it meandered through it, brushing past her shoulder like an old friend who knew she didn't need to be asked how she was, just needed to be here. Her eyes wandered until they landed on a large wooden table by the window. On it sat a sketch pad, a ceramic mug of pencils, and an open box of pastels. The paper in the sketch pad was thick and creamy, the kind that invited your hand to linger. She reached out and traced its edge, feeling the promise of it. The desire wasn't complicated. It was simply to see what would happen if she let herself draw. Not for work, not for approval, not for any purpose other than the quiet pull of the moment. She had spent so much of her life rushing toward deadlines, perfecting presentations, producing results. But here, perfection seemed irrelevant. Here, nothing demanded her polish, only her presence. She eased into the chair at the table. The loft's windows opened into the skyline, where the last blue light of day was fading into deep indigo. It reflected faintly against the gas, so she could see herself, half shadowed in the frame. She didn't look like the woman who had walked briskly through meetings earlier that day. She looked softer, almost like she had stepped into a painting herself. She picked up a pencil, its wood warm from the candlelight, and let the tip rest on the page. She didn't know what she would draw, but the not knowing felt like a relief. The sound of graphite meeting paper was faint, a small scratch that seemed to deepen the silence rather than break it. Her strokes were hesitant at first, like a deer stepping into an open field. But soon they began to flow. Curves became shapes, shapes became patterns. She wasn't thinking about composition or symmetry. She was simply following where her hand wanted to go. Each line felt like it was loosening something inside her, as if she was sketching out thoughts that had been folded too tightly for too long. The saxophone slid into a low note, and she realized she had been breathing differently. Longer inhales, unhurried exhales. She could feel her shoulders lowering, her jaw releasing its grip. Her whole body seemed to remember something she hadn't offered it in a while: permission to be still. The candles swayed gently in a current of air from the window, their light playing across her page. She thought about how the flame didn't hurry itself into brightness. It just glowed, steady and sure, without trying. And somehow, that felt like the most exquisite lesson of the night so far. When she looked down at her sketch, she noticed it was nothing she could name. And that was exactly right. It didn't have to be a thing. It just had to be. And in this loft, with its golden pools of light and unspoken invitations, that was more than enough. Chapter 2. The First Brushstroke. The sketch lay quietly on the table, its lines faint and unassuming, like the first chords of a song that hasn't yet revealed its melody. She studied it for a moment, not with the critic's eye she so often carried in her daily life, but with a kind of gentle curiosity, like watching the tide shift against the shore and wondering where it might go next. Her gaze drifted to the open box of pastels. Their colors sat in neat rows, each stick a small velvety promise. She reached for one soft ochre and felt the way its surface yielded slightly under her fingers. When she lifted it to her nose, it smelled faintly of chalk and the faint mineral scent of something ancient. The first stroke of color landed on the page like sunlight spilling across a quiet street. Ochre blended into pale gold, and as she pressed and smudged, the texture shifted under her touch. She felt her breath sinking with the movement. Inhale as her hand lifted, exhale as it glided down. The candles caught her eye again, their flame steady, casting shadows that swayed in slow conversation. Light pulled across the table, warming the wood and making the pastels grow in their paper sleeves. The saxophone had given way to a piano now, each note dropping like a bead of honey into the evening air. Outside, the city had softened. The windows showed clusters of light from other buildings, each one a tiny story unfolding somewhere she would never know. It comforted her somehow that she could be here in this small golden universe while life continued its rhythm all around her. Her strokes became bolder. She reached for a shade of deep rose and let it curve alongside the gold, like dawn leaning into morning. The colors didn't so much mix as they conversed, two tones leaning toward each other, finding their shared warmth. She thought about how so much of her life had been about definition, knowing exactly what she was aiming for, measuring whether she had achieved it. But here, she didn't have to define anything. The absence of a goal felt almost luxurious, like slipping into a bath with no intention of when to get out. The sound of the pastel scratching against the paper was grounding, rhythmic. She began to notice the small details, the way pigment clung to her fingertips, the tiny dust that gathered at the paper's edge, the smooth weight of the pastel as it shortened in her grip. These were details she would have missed in the pace of her usual days, but here they felt as rich as the artwork itself. She set the pastel down for a moment and simply sat back, letting her eyes wander. The loft had so many quiet corners, a stack of books by the armchair, their spines softened from years of reading, a small plant on the windowsill, its leaves leaning toward the candlelight as if it preferred gold to sunlight, a jar of paintbrushes in every possible size, their bristles stained from past work. Her hand reached toward one of those brushes, almost without thought. It was slender, with a dark wooden handle and fine, soft bristles. She dipped it into a glass jar where water caught the sunlight, the candlelight turning into liquid amber. Then she swirled it into a pan of paint, watching as color bloomed into the water, dissolving into something new. When the brush met the paper, the pigment spread in slow blooming shapes. She watched it feather at the edges, curling into the pastel as if they had been waiting for each other. It was a meeting without urgency, like two old friends reunited after years apart. No rush to tell the whole story, just a presence that filled the space between them. The painting began to take on a life of its own, and she realized that she was smiling. Not the smile she wore for others, a smile that said, "I'm fine, I've got this," but a small inward smile, the kind that comes when you've stumbled into something that feels like home. Here, in the candlelit loft, the lines and colors were not just on the paper. They were in her breath, her pulse, her very skin. And the more she painted, the more she felt herself loosen, as if each brushstroke was quietly returning her to herself. Chapter 3, The Color of quiet. The painting had begun to form, not into something recognizable, but into something whole. The lines curved like murmured words, the colors pressed against each other like dancers swaying in a slow rhythm. She didn't need to name it. The loft seemed to understand it already. The air was warmer now, not from heat, but from the steady hum of presence. The candles shimmered along the walls, the golden light catching the edges of frames, the curve of pottery, the sweep of fabric over the armchair. Each object seemed to have its own small glow, as if it was lit from within. She paused with the brush in her hand, her gaze drifting to the window. The city lights outside had multiplied, some bright and determined, others faint as fireflies. A soft mist had gathered at the edges of the glass, and when she leaned closer, she saw her own reflection layered over the skyline. She barely recognized herself, not because her face had changed, but because her eyes looked unhurried. She thought about how many days she'd moved through with her mind several steps ahead of her body, always thinking about the next meeting, the next email, the next goal. But tonight, her mind had stopped trying to get ahead. It had sat down beside her, here in the flicker of candlelight, and decided to stay a while. She set the brush down and leaned back in her chair. Her hands were freckled with pastel dust and faint streaks of paint, small badges of this gentle rebellion against her usual polished precision. She turned them over slowly, almost studying them, noticing the way the colors softened her skin. A saxophone re-entered the music, low and velvety. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it slide through her like warm light through gas. When she opened them again, the loft seemed more alive. She noticed the way the shadows along the floor curved like the edge of a tide. She noticed the thin thread of smoke rising from a candle, curling itself into the air. She noticed the way the water in the paint jar rippled when she shifted her elbow, catching the candle's glow in tiny waves. It occurred to her that beauty wasn't always in grand moments or rare experiences. It was here, in the stillness between brushstrokes, in the pause before the next sip of tea, in the simple act of letting herself be part of the room instead of the one orchestrating it. Her desire now wasn't to finish the painting or to make it look like a certain way. It was to stay in this moment long enough to feel every detail. The grain of the paper under her wrist, the soft sigh of the floorboards when she shifted her weight, the subtle sweetness of the candle scent mingling with the faint spice of the tea cooling beside her. She picked up another pastel, this one the color of twilight, a muted blue that seemed to hold the hush of night. She brushed it gently across the page, letting it melt into the gold and rose she had already laid down. The effect was like the dusk meeting dawn, an impossible but beautiful crossing of worlds. As she worked, she began to hum softly, not a song she knew, but a tune that seemed to arrive from somewhere inside her. It was the kind of sound that didn't need words, the kind that filled the air like a second candle's light. The loft seemed to lean in closer, as if it were listening, and maybe it was. After all, this was a place built for listening, for catching the unspoken things that so often get drowned out in the noise of the day. And in that moment, she felt it. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full, full of warmth, full of light, full of a calm that was more than the absence of movement. It was the presence of something deep, steady, and utterly unshakable. She smiled again, not even realizing she had been holding her breath. And as she exhaled, the painting seemed to breathe with her. Chapter 4: A Room That Remembers. The night had deepened without her noticing. The skyline outside was now a scattering of lights against velvet black, each one pulsing softly as though it were breathing. The mist on the windows had thickened, blurring the edges of the city so that it seemed farther away, like a memory just out of reach. Inside, the candlelight had grown richer, a deeper gold that clung to the walls and wrapped itself around her like a shawl. She noticed that it didn't just illuminate, it softened. Shadows melted into one another, hard lines blurred, and even her own reflection seemed to dissolve at the edges. She felt as if she were not just in the loft, but part of it. The air held her the way a favorite song holds its opening note, lingering just long enough to let her feel it in her chest. Every object seemed to know it belonged here. The brushes standing like sentinels in their jar, the worn spines of the books, the little ceramic dish with its accidental chip at the rim. Nothing tried to be anything other than what it was. She picked up the brush again, not out of restlessness, but out of invitation. The painting had shifted subtly while she'd been sitting back, as though the pigments had rearranged themselves in her absence. She dipped the brush into water again, noticing how the surface trembled for a moment before settling into stillness. When the brush touched the page, she chose a soft wash of lavender. It bled into the blue, creating something she couldn't have planned, a pale halo, almost like the first light before dawn. She smiled at how the colors seemed to decide for themselves where they wanted to go. She realized then that the loft was teaching her something without a single word. Not everything needs to be directed. Some things grow most beautifully when they are allowed to wander. As she painted, the music shifted to a slow, haunting trumpet. The notes lingered in the air like drops of amber, each one sinking into the room before dissolving. She could almost feel the sound brushing along her skin, low and warm. She let her eyes drift upward for a moment, toward the high ceiling. The wooden beams were dark with age, and between them hung a single string of fairy lights, their tiny bulbs glowing like stars caught indoors. One of them flickered for a moment, and she thought about how even light has its rhythms, its small pauses and returns. The loft began to feel less like a place she had entered and more like a memory she was returning to. She didn't know when she had been here before, but she knew somehow that she had. Perhaps not in this exact room, but in some moment of her life when she'd felt this same unhurried fullness. It was the feeling of being exactly where you were meant to be, with nothing to prove and nothing to fix. The brush slipped from her fingers, resting gently on the table. She leaned back again, her head tilting toward the window, and let herself simply listen to the music, to the faint crackle of a candle, to the quiet inside her own body. Her eyes began to grow heavy, not with fatigue, but with a deep ease that felt like the body's way of saying thank you. The loft seemed to sway slightly in her vision, as though it were breathing along with her. In the softest part of her mind, she thought she could hear the painting speaking, not in words, but in colors, shapes, and textures. Each one seemed to hold a piece of some question she hadn't yet asked, but whose answer she was already starting to feel. She didn't rush to find it. She simply swayed there, bathed in gold, letting the room remember her as much as she remembered it. Chapter 5. The painting breathes. The brush lay on the table, its tip resting in a small pool of lavender paint, as though it had been waiting for her return. She picked it up, letting the bristles glide once more across the page. The strokes were slower now, almost drowsy, the way the sea moves just before night settles completely. Her eyes softened as she watched the colors spread. The gold, the rose, the blue, and now the lavender. All of them met and mingled, no longer separate, no longer trying to keep to their own corners. The edges blurred until they became something else entirely, a field of light and shadow that seemed to hum with a quiet pulse. She leaned closer. It might have been the candlelight, or the late hour, or something else she couldn't name, but the colors began to shimmer faintly. The gold deepened as though it were catching sunlight from another place. The blue swirled in slow motion like clouds drifting across water. She blinked, thinking her eyes might be tired. But when she looked again, the painting was moving, softly, subtly, as if breathing. It wasn't startling. It felt right, as if the paper had always been alive, and she was only now noticing. Each hue seemed to inhale and exhale, expanding and settling, like the rise and fall of a chest in sleep. She rested her elbow on the table, chin in hand, and just watched. There was no urgency to add more, no pressure to define what she saw. She thought about how much of her life was built on measuring progress, finishing projects, checking boxes, hitting marks. But here, the beauty wasn't in completion, it was in the ongoing. Outside, the city lights had taken on a hazy glow through the misted window, like lanterns bobbing on a faraway river. A breeze threaded through the slightly open pane, carrying with it the scent of rain from somewhere distant. It mixed with the warm vanilla cedar of the candles, creating a fragrance she knew she would remember long after tonight. She set the brush down again and let her fingertips skim slightly across the page. The texture felt unchanged, but something in her own skin seemed to recognize the rhythm of the painting's breath. It was almost like touching the surface of a quiet pond and feeling the tiniest ripples answer back. Her gaze drifted around the loft. The shadows had grown deeper, but the light from the candles seemed to bend toward her, as if keeping watch. The music, now a slow guitar, played in gentle circles, each note looping back as if reluctant to leave. And then she realized she wasn't just painting. She was in conversation with the painting. The colors spoke in ways she couldn't translate into words, but she understood them all the same. They spoke of softness, of release, of being exactly enough without the need for more. She felt a kind of warmth spread from her chest to her hands, as if the painting was giving something back to her. A quiet reassurance, a silent nod that she was seen even in her stillness. Her eyelids grew heavier. The lines between her body and the loft blurred until she wasn't sure where she ended and the room began. The hum of the painting seemed to move into her, or perhaps it was her own breath moving into it. Somewhere inside her, the simplest wish rose, not to capture this moment, not to own it, but simply to stay in it for as long as the night allowed. And the painting seemed to answer in its slow breathing light. You already are. Chapter 6. Drifting into the glow. The candles had burned lower, their flames smaller now, but still steady. Each one seemed to lean into its own pool of light, creating little circles of gold that floated in the dark like quiet moons. She sat back in the chair, her hands resting loosely in her lap, the brush and pastels set aside. The painting lay before her, still pulsing with its subtle breath, though she no longer needed to watch to feel it. The rhythm had become part of her own, slow and even, matching the rise and fall of her chest. The guitar on the record faded into a soft hush, replaced by the low rustle of the needle turning in the last groove. She didn't reach to change it. The sound was like the gentle turning of pages in a book, each loop a reminder that the night was still hers. She let her gaze wander lazily over the loft, every detail now softened into dream edges. The armchair looked like it could hold a whole night of unbroken rest. The books seemed to be breathing too, their spines relaxing into the shelves. The little plant on the windowsill had tucked its leaves closer together as if settling in for sleep. The city beyond the glass was a blur of warm light against the mist, almost like the reflection of another candlelit room far away. She thought of the people inside those windows, each of them wrapped in their own version of night, and felt a gentle kinship, the kind that didn't require knowing names. Her body grew heavier in the chair, not with fatigue, but with release. Every muscle had loosened, as if the loft itself had been quietly untying knots she hadn't even known she carried. She closed her eyes, and the candlelight lingered there, painting the inside of her eyelids with soft gold. In her mind, the loft was still glowing around her, the painting still breathing, the music still curling in the air. And then the scene began to blur, not vanish, but dissolve, the way watercolor melts when you add water to the edge. The loft became less a place and more a feeling, the scent of cedar and vanilla, the sound of rain far away, the gentle warmth of something holding her without asking anything in return. The boundary between the painting and the night dissolved too. She imagined stepping into it, her bare feet touching colors that felt like silk and sand all at once. The gold wrapped around her shoulders, the rose brushed against her cheek, the blue stretched out before her like a calm sea. She walked deeper into it, each step lighter than the last, until she wasn't walking at all, just floating in a space where everything was soft and every hue hummed with the quiet assurance that she belonged. The last thing she noticed, before the dream fully took her, was the way the loft seemed to lean closer, as if whispering something it had been holding all night. She couldn't quite catch the words, but she didn't need to. Whatever it was, she felt it settle inside her. The candles flickered once more. The painting breathed once more. And she let go, completely drifting into the glow.